Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain and welcome to The Top. The Last Airbender, not that one, is one of the single greatest works of television period and the best show to ever be featured on the green and orange by an absurdly wide margin. Its characters are across the board great. The arcs are expertly handled both in terms of those characters and the stories they're put in, and with the exception of a couple of episodes, there's really no bad ones. How does one come up with a top 10 list for a show like this? Well, it was hard, no two ways about it, but it's done. So, let's kick things off with number 10. This was the episode, more so than any before it, that truly began Zuko on his own perfectly realized personal journey. The title character also has an important role to play here too, but this episode was primarily about how Zuko came to be the Banished Prince. An episode that works way better given the fact that this was the 12th entry in the series, and not, for example, the 4th. Meaning that by this point, we know who Zuko is, and the timing of getting to really dig into his past is fitting here. But what really makes this episode an all-time great one is how affecting his backstory is, while also adding an extra layer of asshole to the then still faceless final boss of the series. We sympathize with Zuko's struggle, not just because he was literally and permanently scarred for disobedience, but because of the reasons for it. He spoke out of turn because he was the only person in that war room who wanted to do the right thing. We know from there that he'll eventually reform for the better. But what makes that part compelling is the journey and not necessarily the final destination. But we also get the important backstory of Aang smartly paralleled here, giving us insight on the guilt he feels for leaving the world behind when it needed him most, making this easily the second or maybe third best history episode of the series. Not quite as well put together as the episodes just above it, but a solid start at number 10. Another of several great Zuko focus episodes is also one of the show's best for its streamlined and focused take on exactly what the title suggests. There are a few overly familiar beats that you feel just kind of need to happen in a setting like this, but it all works without being too generic, especially since Zuko as a role model / older brother stand-in is a completely novel idea for the series and Zuko as a character. But everything about placing this episode higher than something like the almost equally as great Blue Spirit episode is Zuko's revelation at the end. He chooses to embrace his culture, his heritage, and the troubled past that comes with it, because that's who he is. That's who he'll always be. And by not forgetting that, he was able to eventually restore his own honor and the honor of his nation. This firm declaration was maybe the most definitive moment that eventually allowed the Fire Nation he was raised in to be changed for the better under his leadership, with a few bumps in the road if you read the graphic novels. And now, enter what I think is the best history episode of the show, one that ties together the former Firelord in Sozin with the former Avatar in Roku. And one of the biggest takeaways from their history is the theme of change, something familiar to all Avatar iterations. People change, beliefs are shaped and molded in different ways, and sometimes that results in catastrophe. And, as most of us know, this sets up the reverse parallel of having Aang and Zuko end the series as friends from enemies, whereas Sozin and Roku started as friends and ended as enemies. Destinies change as well, and by Zuko eventually changing his own, he proved to be an integral part in helping Team Avatar end the war and bring balance to the world. It's an episode that operates with straightforward parallels, metaphors, and flashbacks while still being just as engaging as anything that's happened thus far in the present day. That's all there is to it, and that's all there needed to be. No needless convolutions or complications within the backstory, no overstretching of the history itself, perfect as is with what it conveys both subtly and overtly. The first Earth episode is beautifully conveyed in terms of imagery, character conflicts, and end resolutions to those conflicts. After a really fun Book of Water, Book of Earth started things off by taking a slight detour into the realm of consequences, and it really was the perfect question to ask to begin a season 2 of this particular show. If Aang can go into the Avatar state, a state in which he's essentially all-powerful, at least compared to normal benders, why not glow up now and end the war? This creates a great debate before the episode is resolved, because at this point, we know at least two things. One, War has been going on for 100 years, so ending it sooner would be very, very helpful for many a town and village. And 2, Aang feels guilty about abandoning both his people and the world over that same time span, so why not end the war early? Then, Roku swoops in to explain why the Avatar state is so dangerous, which reminds our heroes of the importance of not just the end result, but the means of getting there, which can matter just as much if not more, and is a constant theme throughout the series. And let's not forget the proper introduction given to one of the greatest villains in any show. Azula is sly, charismatic, cunning, wicked, bafflingly beautiful, sharp as a knife, and the perfect next step opponent-wise for Avatar and the gang. Zuko was one thing, but Azula was on another plane at the time, and the gang needed to be a lot more clever as well as strong to stop her plans and the team she assembled to carry them out. And oh yeah, she conquered Ba Sing Se, something nobody in her nation could do in 100 years, but we'll get there. The final 4 episodes of the series obviously intertwine a fair bit, so rating them individually is tricky, but part 3 is really where things get rolling as the endgame match we've all been waiting for finally arrives. The aesthetic and the scale that the first 2 parts help create is at its peak here, where you really feel like, yes, this is how the fate of the world will be decided. But even beyond that is the arguably even better parts of the episode given to the other members of Team Avatar, including my favorite fight of the series and the infiltration of enemy airships. But let's not just gloss over that fight as colorful poetry in motion, because it represents the true ends to the arcs of both characters involved. Azula is a character built on control, so when the pieces start falling around her, she unravels and becomes mentally unstable. Meanwhile, every single episode with Zuko in it, which is all but 12, has patiently built up to him overcoming his perfect sister and claiming the throne. It's in that moment where the roles are brilliantly reversed, because Zuko left home scarred and uncertain, but is now sure of his identity and his destiny. Azula left home confident and poised, and is now anything but. After learning more about himself and ingraining all of Uncle's lessons, Zuko, just like Aang himself, has finally achieved balance. And that's what makes him a match for Azula before she relies on her expected cheap tricks. Everything about this episode, especially how it ends, is the perfect cliffhanger for the grand finale, but they pulled no punches along the way. As I mentioned, this show has a lot to say about the ways and means one should accomplish a goal, which is to say that the ends don't always justify the means in the Avatar universe, and they created one of the best in the series from simply applying that concept to an episode-long whodunit mystery where the twist was obvious, but the real gripping turn was, you guessed it, the ways and means. Enter bloodbending, perhaps the single most scary, bone-chilling technique these brilliant creators ever came up with. And what makes it so perfect as a power is exactly that, because before now, Water Tribe women have been portrayed as caring, humble, and gracious, which is exactly what Hama appears to be at first. This is important because it's the show telling us that great evil can be done by anyone with power, not just the people who burn stuff down. Asking the complex moral question of what depths would you sink to in order to survive, and when is using such power ever justified? And, in the end, Hama does kind of win. Katara is forced to use a technique she never wanted any part of to save her friends. Justified, but still leaving her feeling vile and broken on the inside. These are the interesting moral dilemmas that made this show as a whole way more than just another cartoon. And this was one of several focus episodes that established Katara as way more than just a stand-in mother, but an invaluable and well-constructed character that deals with just as much as anyone to eventually resolve her own character arc. This was a 2-part episode, but for the purposes of this list, I'm counting them as one here, mainly because it pretty much is an extended singular episode, and a damn perfect one at that, which all episodes this high pretty much are. After visiting Wang Shitong, he who knows 10,000 things, I just honestly really wanted to say his full title in this video, but anyways, that episode allows Sokka to cleverly figure out that firebenders lose their powers for a short time during a solar eclipse, meaning that it would be the most ideal time to launch a full-scale attack on the Fire Nation. A great detail about this is how it's built up to as what could have been an end-all be-all fight, despite the fact that the invasion failed. But everything about this game of war tactics was well done on both ends. Our heroes had a very well thought out plan on how to counter pretty much anything they faced, while the Fire Nation was very much ready for that offensive. There's also a very minor but very important detail regarding how the Fire Nation soldiers seemed completely unaware of the eclipse and the effect it would have, despite Ozai and Azula being fully prepared for it long before. That helps to sell the idea that maybe they did catch the Fire Nation off guard, and maybe this was their chance to end the war outright. But, as Toph herself says, they were ready for them. All while Azula brilliantly mind games the team and keeps them from ever reaching Ozai's hidden lair. Did I mention how great an antagonist Azula is? Because she's so damn good at this. It was both the biggest and the best full-scale battle of the series, and every inch of it delivered while also giving us the Zuko-Ozai confrontation that absolutely needed to happen. One spot on this list, but 2 perfect episodes. Despite Zuko being the most important character in this show development-wise, so much of what makes the Book of Earth an incredible step up from Book of Water is, of course, Azula. Her captivating personality and her need for control throughout Season 2 not only created a lot of high hurdles for our heroes, as I touched on, but it also allowed her to manipulate the people around her for her own ends. From the drill to the season finale, Azula has a master plan for taking control of the most important Earth Nation city, and it worked. This episode represents the pinnacle of all of that, and also gives us one of the most devastating putdowns in recorded history.
You've beaten me at my own game.
Don't flatter yourself. You were never even a player.
Talk about kicking a man when he's down. And naturally, this also represents an important next step for all the characters too, especially Zuko, since he's the one actually standing on the Crossroads of Destiny, and surprising at least a few, he chooses the wrong path. Despite looking to reform himself during the entire Book of Earth, despite fixing up a tea shop with Uncle Iroh, and despite even going on a real date, he still relapses. And it's painful, specifically because the show put in so much work towards getting him to change, only to be once again influenced by the sway of Azula and the promise of restored honor, and made even more painful given the fact that Iroh has to suffer physically and emotionally from that betrayal. All of those factors brought together makes this one of the most brilliantly conceived, well-paced, and well-developed season finales of any version of Avatar, while also still delivering a heart-wrenching conclusion that nearly kills the hope of the world in the process. Nearly the second best episode of all time, but the single best character-focused episode just nabbed the next spot up. Since the very beginning of the show, Katara had been defined as the one most closely associated with the price of war. A lot of her strong will comes from a genuine desire to see the nation that stole her mother's life brought down. So, what do you do now that you actually have a member of said nation fighting on your side? You intelligently craft a story that makes light at first of Zuko's former antagonizing ways, only to realize that some people can't just laugh it off, making it that much more vital that Zuko be the one to come along with her on this trip, because he knows the Fire Nation well, of course, but also because he knows firsthand about confronting someone whose wrongdoing shaped your life for the worse. This leads into a captivating and effectively darkly toned mission to find the captain of the Southern Raiders so that Katara can administer payback. Every scene, every moment is flawless here. Even the tiny details like Zuko being kind of weirded out by bloodbending, how the rain is used in several shots, and how Katara's emotions fluctuate from mad to sad to somewhat content but not completely forgiving. It's a perfect episode, and a perfect focus episode, which does well to build off the other great Katara focus episode by putting her in a situation emotionally similar to Hama's, a situation where things like bloodbending, almost murder, that's all on the table because they did it to you. This is how great characters become exceptional ones, by establishing them well, then pushing them beyond their breaking points and seeing how they react or change as a result. From top to bottom, front to back, start to finish, minute 0 to minute 24, this episode is flawless, and even comes with a really great Azula-Zuko battle in the very beginning. However, only one episode can claim the top spot. But before we get there, let's bring in some honorable mentions. may seem like a save for an easy pick, but as far as I'm concerned, the series finale of Avatar The Last Airbender is also its single greatest episode. It formulates a flawless season finale that, even after watching it 6 times and counting, still leaves me running for the tissues during the final seconds. But it's more than just emotionally affecting, it's the perfect ending for everyone and everything, something that even exceptional shows struggle with. Azula is finally defeated by Katara and Zuko. Zuko completes his long journey thanks in large part to Katara, a few episodes after Zuko helped her overcome her biggest hurdle. Sokka's quick thinking takes down an entire squadron of airships with the help of Suki and Toph, and most importantly of all, Aang doesn't kill the Firelord, but still defeats him. We've been talking about it ad nauseum throughout this video, but once again, the theme of means to an end arises in the most important moment. Everyone almost across the board, including Ozai himself, and even a former air nomad Avatar, agrees that the Firelord needs to be killed. But Aang, in spite of others, and at times himself telling him otherwise, finds a way to end the war on his terms, thus perfectly capping off his character arc. Zuko declares an end to the war. He and Aang plan to lead the world into a new age of peace and understanding, everyone celebrating with tea, and the lovebirds finally settle their feelings. Everything that had to conclude did so exactly as needed. Every theme and character struggle that defined the series up to this point was effectively utilized. Simply put, they created the perfect ending to a nearly perfect show. A show that I proudly call my favorite of all time. Avatar Aang is number 1, so the list is done. Make sure to share which episodes you thought were the best down below. And as always, thanks for watching.